I'm a 31-year-old man who has been married to my wife, a 27-year-old woman, for nearly 3 years. We've been living together even before tying the knot, and our marriage has generally been a happy one. I've never questioned her loyalty because I've never had a reason to. We've had our fair share of disagreements, but nothing extreme. I was confident that if my wife were ever unhappy, she would communicate it to me. So it hit me like a ton of bricks when I stumbled upon a series of overly friendly messages on her phone one day. Her phone was on the dining table, and I had picked it up to bring it to her bedroom as she had requested. A notification lit up the screen, and I couldn't help but glance at it. There were messages from someone named Kara, and they were of a highly personal nature. I didn't know anyone named Kara, and the nature of those texts immediately raised my suspicions. I brought her the phone in the bedroom, and when she opened it, she asked if I had seen her notifications. I lied and said no, but she mentioned that it was just a notification for a kid's game and that she felt embarrassed I had seen it. I assured her that I hadn't seen anything and left her to her phone. However, I couldn't help but study her expressions because my doubts were now eating at me. She continued to text Kara with a smile on her face, which only fueled my unease. Unable to shake off my suspicions, I eventually left the room and told her I'd be sleeping in the living room, citing some work I needed to finish. She didn't even look up from her phone when I grabbed a pillow and headed to the couch. Restlessness consumed me as I couldn't stop thinking about those messages and the worst-case scenarios that were playing out in my mind. I had never considered the possibility that she would cheat on me, but now I had my doubts. I let it go that night, but the nagging feeling persisted. I began checking her phone whenever the opportunity arose. I needed to put my mind at ease to know the truth. I wanted desperately for it to be untrue. But then, one day, I saw another text from Kara. It contained a time and place, along with nicknames and emojis that resembled a date plan. I knew I should have confronted her, but I was so furious about her potentially ruining our seemingly perfect marriage that a simple confrontation didn't feel like enough. Instead, I decided to go to the specified place at the designated time. She arrived a bit late, and right in front of the cafe, she kissed the guy. A hello kiss, but a kiss nonetheless. It was the kind of kiss you give your husband when you return from work. I recognized the guy. He was her colleague. I had met him a couple of times when picking my wife up from her office. I knew his name, and I knew for a fact that he was married. I was torn between wanting to storm over and confront them both, to cry my heart out, and maintaining my composure. I chose the latter, hoping to give her a taste of her own medicine. I bided my time, and it was excruciating to be in the same house as her, eating dinner together, sharing a bed, and engaging in conversations about anything while I knew she was betraying me. But I remained patient, determined not to let her get away with it so easily. Our tradition of hosting game nights with friends every other month was the perfect opportunity to carry out my plan, and I organized everything, just as we always did. She was always competitive at games, so our game nights were something she looked forward to eagerly. When everyone arrived, we started playing Pictionary. In the midst of the game, just before it was her turn, I slipped a note into the jar. As she picked it up, her expression shifted from joy to confusion, and then embarrassment within seconds. She looked at me with tear-filled eyes, and in that moment, I decided to reveal everything I knew right there in front of our friends. Everyone was taken aback because, like me, they hadn't anticipated such a revelation from my wife. She pleaded with me to let her explain, and reluctantly, I agreed, curious about what excuse she would conjure. Through tears, she claimed I was jumping to conclusions, asserting that she was merely friends with her colleague. I remained calm, insisting she pack her bags and leave. Her demeanor changed swiftly. She admitted her mistake, but insisted it was unintentional. I couldn't fathom how infidelity could just happen without neglecting your spouse, but at least she acknowledged it. I calmly told her to leave, unable to bear her presence in my home any longer. I also informed her that I intended to speak to her colleague's wife, because he couldn't escape consequences either. Our friends, sympathetic to my situation, tried to console her. Despite my anger, I didn't want her to face this alone. Some friends offered her their guest rooms for the night, but she opted for a hotel. She accused me of humiliating her in front of everyone, insisting we talk when we were both calmer. Reluctantly, I agreed, even though I had little patience for her lies and fabrications at that moment. After she left, she persistently tried to contact me, but I ignored most of her calls and messages. I needed time to gather my thoughts. My wife had unraveled into a mess within a month. I did talk to her colleague's wife, who, too, had suspected her husband's infidelity. She revealed her plans to divorce him and suggested I do the same. I agreed, but it was far from easy. I had loved my wife for a long time, and we had been happy. We didn't have significant issues in our marriage, and yet she had chosen to betray us. About 2 weeks later, my wife, now living in a hotel, begged me to let her in and hear her out. I reluctantly allowed her inside, and she immediately burst into tears. She professed her love for me and admitted her mistake. When I asked how long the affair had been going on, she confessed it had lasted a year. My heart shattered, but my sorrow quickly turned to rage. I couldn't fathom why she had destroyed our otherwise happy marriage. She couldn't provide a single reason for her actions. She insisted on giving our marriage a second chance, but I was done. I told her to leave and not to contact me for a while. I needed time to think, to sort through the chaos she had caused. It's been 6 months since I asked my wife to leave. We've met a couple of times since, during which she apologized profusely, begging me not to divorce her. I was torn because I still loved her deeply. Ending our marriage was the right thing to do after her betrayal, but I couldn't find it in myself to move forward. Our marriage was in limbo. We lived separately, hardly speaking. I knew I had to end it officially because I couldn't trust her anymore. The trust I had once placed in her was irreparably shattered. She kept assuring me she wouldn't repeat her mistake, urging me to trust her again. I was considering giving her another chance when I received an email from her colleague's now ex-wife. She claimed my wife and her ex-husband were still in contact. I desperately hoped she was wrong, hoping my wife couldn't be that cruel. I asked my wife to meet, and, as usual, she began with apologies. I confronted her about her ongoing communication with the man she had the affair with. She hesitated, and in that moment I knew the truth. I urged her to be honest, and she confessed they had spoken when he was going through his divorce. She insisted they were just friends, but the little trust I had left vanished. With that admission, I realized I could never trust her again. There was no point in staying in a marriage where trust and unconditional love were lost. I informed her to expect divorce papers soon. She could take anything she still had in the house. Despite her tears and pleas, there was no other option. I felt a strange mix of relief and sadness, relieved to finally end the turmoil, but saddened by the loss of what was once a loving relationship. Thankfully, we didn't have children. It made the process a little less painful. She left quietly, and although I didn't care if she went back to that man, I needed to let her go to move on with my life. I should be informed beforehand and not find out when I walk through the door. I expressed my concerns, feeling unsettled about the situation. My wife seemed dismissive, telling me I was overreacting and that my brother needed a place to stay temporarily. The next day, I decided to have a conversation with my wife about boundaries. I explained that while I understood she wanted to help my brother, I needed to be part of the decision-making process, especially when it involved our home. She countered, saying that it was just a temporary situation, and I shouldn't make a big deal out of it. I insisted that communication and mutual respect were essential in our relationship and that decisions like these should be made together. As the discussion continued, my wife became defensive, insisting that she was just being supportive and didn't see the need for my involvement. I emphasized the importance of boundaries in maintaining a healthy marriage and family dynamic. We talked through our concerns, trying to find a compromise that respected both our relationship and my brother's situation. In the end, we agreed that in the future, we would discuss such matters before making decisions that affected our home life. While my initial reaction might have been perceived as an overreaction, The conversation allowed us to establish clearer boundaries and strengthen our communication as a couple. I firmly believed that I should have been the one to decide whether my brother stayed over. He had no right to call my wife and intrude without my consent. I insisted that he should have waited for my call, and I planned to talk to him about it in the morning. However, my wife brushed off my concerns, telling me to grow up and accept that he was always welcome in our home. Now my wife is furious with me, and I find myself stuck with my brother in the house, unsure of how long he'll be staying until he figures out his life. Already having 2 teenagers, I felt overwhelmed having another person, especially my adult brother, residing with us. I stood my ground, believing that he shouldn't be here, but my wife remained upset with me. Am I the jerk for asserting that she shouldn't have picked up my brother and allowed him to stay at our house? Update. I don't believe it makes me a bad person to think that an 18-year-old should be independent and not rely on family support. I expect the same for my children. They are supposed to have a job and save money to move out after graduating from high school. If they go to college, they can stay, but they are expected to pay for it themselves and contribute a small amount in rent. My wife doesn't agree with this and believes our children can stay as long as they need. I'm trying to help her see reason. As a child, I was never taken to zoos, museums, or out to eat. I went to a public school and wasn't allowed to participate in sports or activities due to financial constraints. I had to get a job as soon as I could. My parents were 16 when they had me, and even when they got older and had more money, I still didn't receive the opportunities my brother had. My brother received the best, while I got nothing. It's time for him to stand on his own. Yes, my children enjoyed activities like going to the zoo, parks, and museums, as well as participating in sports. However, those privileges were for my kids, not my brother. I couldn't understand why my wife would include him in these experiences. My brother has always regarded her as another mother, so I had to share her with him. Last night, when I got home from work, everyone was preparing for dinner. After the meal, I asked my kids to go to their rooms so I could talk to my brother and wife. I questioned my brother about his presence and why he felt the need to involve us instead of dealing with his issues independently. He explained that he needed to escape his home environment. He had just discovered that his girlfriend had cheated on him and was planning to leave. She blamed him for not marrying her or having a baby, which she desired deeply. I told my wife that what she wanted wasn't unreasonable and that my brother was being immature. I argued that if he could live with his girlfriend, he could marry her. My wife countered, saying that not everyone wants to be married and have children at such a young age, reminding me that he was an adult who needed to grow up. I expressed my displeasure with them making decisions without me and explained that this situation could have been resolved the next morning. There was no need for anyone to drive 2 hours or run away from home. I inquired when my brother planned on leaving, and he informed me that his girlfriend was moving out by Sunday, after which he would go back home. He still had 2 months left on the lease, so he intended to look for a smaller place to move into. I shared my reservations about him staying for that extended period, but my wife defended him, insisting he was my brother and a few days wouldn't hurt anyone. Reluctantly, I agreed, although I made it clear that I didn't like it. I felt cornered and uncomfortable with the situation, but I didn't want to make a bigger issue out of it. I still believed he needed to go home and deal with his problems independently. My brother thanked me, and we parted ways. My wife and I continued to discuss the matter, both feeling discontented with one another. "You're the jerk," she said. "He's an adult." Then another person chimed in, "Or are you leaving out a ton of info? You have some minor points. I don't like people staying at my house either, but it isn't just your house, and it's family. You didn't specify that there was a horrible drama or anything. Your post comes off as controlling and unpleasant." The discussion continued, with varying opinions. Some believed I was in the wrong, while others saw my point of view. It was clear that this situation had caused tension between my wife and me. The situation turned grim in 2020 when I lost my job due to having to homeschool our kids. We couldn't afford the rent, and 6 months later, we were evicted. My mother-in-law, who initially offered us 2 bedrooms, withdrew her support as soon as we became homeless. For 4 months, we lived out of our van with our kids until a homeless shelter opened up. During this time, both my mother-in-law and sister-in-law distanced themselves from us, showing little compassion. Despite our efforts to reach out, we were met with judgment from sister-in-law, who received her house after her father's passing and hadn't paid taxes in years. We were criticized for our life choices and were made to feel like failures because we were over 30, had 3 kids, and were struggling. Fast forward, we managed to turn things around drastically. We built a house from scratch, involving our kids, and gained invaluable experience. The outcome was perfect. Our kids were overjoyed to have participated in building their own home. We also started our own business, achieving this success without any help from my husband's family, despite their broken promises. Throughout this journey, I couldn't help but develop a bitter resentment toward them due to their lack of support. Recently, my mother-in-law, who is facing eviction herself after losing her retirement benefits, approached us asking to stay in our home if she became homeless. My initial reaction was to laugh at her audacity. My husband stood by my side, showing his resentment toward her for abandoning us in our time of need. She left offended, and later, sister-in-law criticized us, labeling us as trash for not allowing her soon-to-be evicted elderly mother to move in. I suggested a nearby nursing home for her instead. While some friends said my response was harsh, considering the way they treated us, I don't believe I am the jerk in this situation. Their lack of support when we needed it has created a chasm, and I find it hard to extend a helping hand now.